Greetings fellow casters, and welcome to the first upload of Caster's Corner, your guides in the ever-changing landscape of Elestria. I'll be your host for the day, the Law YGO, here to show off what I've been cooking up for the new Daybreak meta. It's no secret that Daybreak is chock full of new tools for the meta game, from the oracle-like knowledge of Solar, to the suppressing power of Lunar, to even a Cartoon Network character's introduction in the ever-evolving beat-down deck of crabs. But today, I'm here to tell you that the threat that very well may be the meta dominator is not from Daybreak, but rather from Frostfall. Run for cover, it's Wasp Ivy.
You like jazz?
Starting out our list, we've got 3 Cyanectar and 2 Wasp Ivy, the cornerstone of the deck. For those unaware, Cyanectar is a 1-spirit 2/1 Earth Elestral who can special ascend itself into Wasp Ivy and hand her deck when a player casts one of 3 specific runes, those being Poison Tipped Arrow, Poison Nectar, or Poison Tunic, enabling a fast ascension into Wasp Ivy, a 2-Earth 8/1 who expends the opponent by 3 when destroyed in battle, and if ascended off of Cyanectar, is immune to counter runes. Wasp Ivy's closest comparison here is probably Sonicor from base set, but unlike Sonicor, doesn't lock up your own counter runes, meaning you can keep disrupting your opponent to your heart's content. Past that, we're running more standard Earth options like 3 Viserys, still being a solid 5 that can clear most power matchups, 2 Rummagem for searching out your Earth tools, 3 Verdolith as you have no idea how fast this deck can burn through spirits, and 2 Sproutier as the best ascension tool for Wasp Ivy is actually an artifact, so being able to search it with a 5 defense body is extremely useful. Lastly, for our Elestral count is 3 copies of Estrabet, otherwise known as the Funny Bunny. As the raw advantage that you get off of Bunny is just insanely powerful, especially with the 5 defense body, you're going to be able to constantly just re-enchant Thunders to it and keep getting your searches off. Moving into the invokes, we've got 3 copies of Nectar, as with Verdolith, it's never really going to be a bad option. 3 copies of Ambrosia, which should basically be standard at this point. 3 copies of Earthquake, as you're running an Earth deck, and this is the premier Elestral removal rune. Honestly, for this format, you should be playing 3 of this in any deck you possibly can. As for artifacts, which we are actually playing artifacts, it's one of the cornerstones of this particular deck, we're playing 3 copies of Poison Tunic and 1 copy of Bag of Winds. Poison Tunic is one of the 2 cards from Daybreak that we're playing here. Honestly, it has made the deck so much better, as rather than relying on triggering a PTA to ascend, or more desperately a Poison Nectar, which almost never goes off, Tunic is a proactive card that can be used after casting Cyanectar to immediately jump up to Wasp Ivy. In addition to that, it also drops the attack of the Elestral it's enchanted onto, and makes the opponent expend 2 when that Elestral is destroyed by battle, allowing you to go spirit neutral for its initial cast. Bag of Winds is a little more precautionary, as once you have up the Wasp Ivy, there's really only 2 things in the game that can remove it, those being removal invoke runes like Earthquake or Laurels, or removal Elestrals like Eddy and Boombat. By putting a bag onto your Wasp, you're removing half of those threats, leaving the Elestral side of that to be handled by your back row. Speaking of, rounding out the deck, we've got 3 copies of Gorgon's Gaze, 3 copies of Poison Tipped Arrow, which these should be basically standard for most decks at this point, as well as 3 copies of Argo. Argo is the other new addition here, allowing us easier access to Wasp Ivy thanks to casting Tunic out of the deck in combat, which can either be used as a more cost-intensive shield that goes for the same net spirit cost, while also removing the Elestral, or as a way to ascend into Wasp Ivy in the battle phase. Legitimately, Argo and Tunic have completely changed the dynamic of the deck for the better, and it makes an impact almost every time it goes off. As for the spirits, the count here is actually pretty malleable, all things considered, but my current count is 2 Winds for the Bag of Winds, 4 Thunder for Rabbits, and last but not least, we have 14 Earths to round out the spirit deck, which, trust me, you're gonna want this. Probably the most malleable point of cut here is actually the Thunders, as realistically you don't need 4 copies of Zaptor just to keep your Estrabet live, but I find that Earths are a lot easier to put back into rotation thanks to Verdolith, whereas Thunder specifically needs Ambrosia. As for how to get into playing the deck, standardly to perform a Wasp line you're going to need 2 things, a Cyanectar and a Trigger, and as such you're going to need to take your mulligans for cards that can form a defensive line while you prepare, specifically in that of Rabbit and Sprout here. Once you've got a Tunic in your grip, don't be afraid to grab Bag out of the deck with Sprout, but standardly prioritize Tunic for your Wasp lines. Once you have a perimeter set up, drop the Cyanectar and fire the Tunic and get Wasp out ASAP. Standardly at this stage, there are only 2 cards that can actually stop it, those being Dense Fog and Gorgons, which can suppress the Cyanectar for the turn and lock it from getting an Ascension off. If that happens, Don't worry, you still got backups in PTA and Argo to trigger with, so sitting on a Cyanectar is not always the worst option. Something else to keep in mind is that Verdalist's recursion effect is not just when it's cast using its effect, but also when it ascends. Meaning that if you have a Sprout here that's just sitting in defense, kind of taking up board space, you can always ascend it up into Verdalith and turn that 5 defense body into a 7 defense body, which actually comes up more often than you would realize because of crabs. Lastly, and probably most importantly for this entire deck, and probably the biggest thing I need to emphasize when you're playing this, do not rush Wasp. If you pump all of your resources into getting a Wasp down on the first turn, and then your opponent just flips a Laurels, you're gonna feel pretty stupid. The main reason why I'm saying set up your defensive lines first is actually because the Strabit and Sprout here both will most likely stick around on the board for more than a turn, and as such you can set them up like that, then go into Waspivy, and that actually gives you a layer of insulation against Laurels specifically. Though granted, a lot of times you're just going to need to be able to read your opponent, as you may need to just wait until you have Bag of Winds so that Earthquake doesn't mess you up either. With that in mind, that's the basics to Waspivy. If you're looking for changes in side deck options, my first instinct is to go straight to Tsunami, and though I probably should be playing it in the main, there are too many decks using water in my local area right now for me to consider it for the main deck. The other big consideration here should be the Lunar package of Specterus and Dense Fog. While these are powerful, they take up a lot of main deck real estate to fully lean into and would require cutting options that are more reliable to the strategy at hand. Lastly is Poison Nectar. This card is a wonderful Ascension tool, but only if you're playing into a strategy it can hurt, like the Fruit Package decks. This is absolutely a side deck option for now, and I would almost require it to be there for these matchups as they swing the game so heavily in your favor that it's ridiculous. Thank you all for supporting our first endeavor into the Elestral space, and be sure to check out my co-casters of Sunny, MBT, and Trishula, who you'll be hearing from shortly. Until next time, keep your spirit decks full and your counter runes live. Take care.